Welcome, everybody. Just to introduce myself, my name is Dr. Sarmen Sarkissian. So I am on the board of the Armenian American Medical Society, for those who don't know me. And importantly, on the board, I am the chair of the Mentorship and Membership Committee. And why that matters is, for a lot of our strong Armenian youth that are planning on pursuing careers in healthcare, we've really expanded our efforts throughout the community to help connect them with Armenians that are in the healthcare profession, whether that's physicians, pharmacists, dentists, or any other professionals in the healthcare community. And as part of our mentorship drive, we've been able to organize a lot of events where we put together panelists to help students throughout this process ask a lot of their burning questions. And as part of this effort, we want to bring together people across the entire spectrum. And there's really no one else straddling that fence than undergraduates who've successfully been offered a position in medical school and are either have already matriculated, and that goes forward for dental school and pharmacy school as well, or are about to matriculate. So today I'm lucky enough to have Sofia Yeremian, a soon-to-be physician, joining us to tell her about her pathway over the last several years after high school. So without further ado, Sophia, if you can tell me a little bit about yourself before we go on to talk about your path.
Sure. Thank you so much for this opportunity, Dr. Sarkissian. A little bit about me. My name is Sophia Yeremian. I graduated from UCLA in 2022 with a bachelor's in molecular biology. Since then, I've taken on various extracurriculars, one of which was founding the Armenian Pre-Health Society, and I'm also currently the first ever intern for the Armenian American Medical Society. And in about 2 weeks, I will actually be matriculating into my first year of medical school at the Kirk Kerkorian School of Medicine at UNLV.
Very good. And, Sophia had done a lot of work for the Armenian Medical Society. And, I really fought hard to make sure that we picked the right intern for our first AAMS intern. And, Sophia has been a wonderful fit. She's done a lot of great projects for us. But it's time she go on to medical school and really get the two initials behind her name and come back and really serve the community. So to tell us about this pathway, because it does create a lot of stress for students, unless they had a parent who was, in a healthcare profession, in particular in the United States, it could be this sort of very nebulous journey. You don't know what is sometimes, or what the main variables are, and you don't want to put, you don't know how much weight to put on each one unless you have firsthand experience yourself. So I thought I'd start off with the MCAT. So tell me a little bit about your MCAT journey. Did you end up taking it after you graduated, or did you take it during your third year, your fourth year? And if so, was it in the summertime? Tell me a little bit about that.
Sure. So I took my MCAT exam and started studying for it actually after I had graduated UCLA, just because I didn't want studying for the MCAT to interfere with studying for my classes. I wanted to make sure I finished my 4 years with a good GPA and not cause any issues between GPA, having a good GPA, and scoring well on the MCAT exam. So I took it. I graduated actually a quarter early, so I finished in March. I gave myself about a couple weeks of a break, and then I started studying, I want to say in like late April, early May.
Okay. And as far as your preparation, did you end up signing up for some of these companies like Kaplan or Princeton Review?
So I did not, just because one, they're very expensive. Two, I know of a lot of students that did sign up for courses and they didn't perform well even after taking the courses. So I didn't really see a point to it. There are so many great resources online that are free. There are so many cheaper resources that you can find on like Facebook groups where people are selling like their prep material that you can use. So there are a lot of really great resources online that I thought would be a better fit for me than spending thousands of dollars for a course. So what I ended up really using were the Kaplan books, Khan Academy videos online, which are free, the UWorld Test Bank, which I highly, highly recommend everybody to get, Jack Weston, which is a free test bank for the car section of the MCAT, which is also free online. And I also used Blueprint for practice exams because they're very similar to the MCAT. And then, of course, the AAMC official MCAT prep material. So there are a lot of really great resources that you can use that will prepare you well for the exam.
So I know you really decided to sit down and plan for this after you graduated. Were you sort of practicing along the way during, your third and fourth year? Because, as everybody knows, unless you've taken a practice test or seen what the material is like, the way you're tested in, say, biochemistry at UCLA or USC or organic chemistry, it's pretty different than how you'll be tested for that on the MCAT. How did you prepare that? Did you do little snippets here and there, or you just said, you know what, let me get my degree, walk, have a good time, and then I'll sit down?
Yeah, I didn't think about the MCAT up until like after I got my degree and I was just ready to sit down and focus on it because like you said, it's very different than what you're used to in your classes. And the MCAT is actually a lot more general than most people expect. Like when you're reading the Kaplan books, they're very detailed to the point where there's so many details in there that really don't come up on the MCAT exam. So one of the biggest mistakes that I make that I tell all students that ask me for advice is don't spend as much time on the content review because the questions and going through question banks are really what's going to change your score. I spent about 3 months just constantly reading and rereading the books and taking notes and creating flashcards, all of which I never used, and my score was not going up. So I was really just having a hard time until I spoke to somebody that's already in medical school. He's actually a resident now. He's like, you're doing it all wrong. He said, you shouldn't be spending so much time reading the books, max 2, 3 weeks, and you should really be just going through practice questions. So after I finished my content review, I completely transitioned to only practice questions. And after doing about 2,500 practice questions, my score shot up by about 10 points. So practice questions really make a big difference.
What were you averaging as far as hours per week? And, during this time, were you doing any other extracurriculars? Would you say you're doing about 4 hours a day times 6 days a week? So, which is about 24 some odd hours, or
So another advice I'd give on that is when I first started studying, I was doing crazy hours. I was getting up at 8, studying until like 8 p.m., and then that led to burnout. So from there, I was not doing well. So what I would really suggest is just do 8 to 5, or if you're doing extracurriculars, just do 4 hours, maybe 8 to 12, or start a little later in the day, maybe 10 to 2, and then just spend those hours really rigorously just studying, not really distracted by anything else, and then go about your day with other extracurriculars. I did have other extracurriculars going on. I was volunteering at a local clinic. I was still doing a little bit of research on the side. But just studying those long hours really isn't worth it because you're not really getting material in your head if you're just constantly sitting and staring at a page. So having a lot more structure, having a certain time within the day where you're just going to be dedicated to studying and doing effective studying is really what makes a difference when preparing for the exam.
oh, very good. I remember when I was doing it, I initially signed up for an April exam, and I remember, I was a chemistry major, and I had a genetics class, a quantum mechanics class, and I think I may have had a biochemistry class. And and I was taking the Kaplan course in Westwood, and as time evolved, I told myself that I don't need to juggle 80 things. I decided to just postpone the exam, sit down and take it in the summer between
Mhm.
my junior year and my senior year, and then sort of go from there. And, it was definitely stressful because, first there's sort of that guilt associated with having to postpone the exam.
Mhm.
And then, your summer plans change if that's not what you had planned. And then I still applied. So I was dealing with primary, secondary applications, the MCAT prep, the letters of rec, and, if I had just decided to do it at the end of my fourth year, it would have been a much less, stressful process. So it is something that does come up. And, when I started medical school, in my school, the average age was 24 for matriculation. So on average, people had taken about 2 years off.
Mhm.
So half the class had taken more than 2 years off. So it is not an uncommon journey. So, with that being said, so are there any other exams other than the MCAT that you think students should know about?
Yeah, so there are two exams that I actually didn't know about until I was already in the process, one of which is the Casper exam, and the second is the AAMC preview exam. And both of these are situational judgment exams, meaning they just want to see what your professionalism is and like how you handle different situations. And they're honestly not difficult exams. I only spent like a week studying for them, and they're exams that you can take from home on your computer. And how they usually work is I want to say there's maybe like 5 or 6 general situations that you can get, but they just ask them in different ways. One example is if you catch someone cheating in class, or you catch someone doing something wrong at work, or someone doing something wrong at the hospital. how do you solve the problem? If you have a patient that's refusing treatment, how do you go about it? If you have someone that's not being active in a group project, or there's a nurse in the hospital that's not as attentive as usual, how do you go about it? So they ask the same situations in just different ways, and they want to see how you approach the situation. And the best way to prepare for that is there are a lot of free questions, practice questions online. I actually use Shamazian, who has a lot of really great resources on his website that students can use. And I want to say maybe 4 to 7 days is all you need to really just prepare for the exam. One of them involves like a video recording of yourself answering questions. The other one involves both video and typing. So a good way to prepare is practice recording yourself answering questions and then practice your typing, because one of the exams requires like pretty quick typing. So you want to feel comfortable typing quickly to make sure you answer everything with the question.
Very good. So, you graduated, your grades are kind of locked in, and then, you have your MCAT scheduled. What was that actual application process like? Because, the first two things in your head are, my GPA and MCAT, but I wish it was that simple. And then
Yeah.
there's kind of the mechanics of applying. So any wisdom you can impart?
Yes, so start early. That's one thing I tell everyone to just start preparing early. And early means you can even start your freshman year of college. You can start logging the activities you're doing, kind of keeping a diary. How many hours am I doing? What are some meaningful or rememberable moments in that particular activity that I can talk about in my personal statement or talk about in my activity section? And then once you kind of roll around closer to the start of the application cycle, which I believe is like June or July, you want to start at least, I want to say maybe at least 2 months before that, just kind of getting an idea of what you want to write for your personal statement. And personal statement is, you can find the question anywhere. It's just like, why do you want to become a doctor? So you can start thinking about that and drafting that really early on and try to have at least maybe like 3 or 4 professional people to read over it, whether that's medical students, counselors, physicians, just so that they can give you some input. So starting early on that, secondaries take up a lot of time. So I tell everybody before you start getting your secondary application, start pre-writing them. The secondary application questions are available online too. Just look up the school, look up secondary questions. It'll give you a list of the school's previous year questions that they end up reusing. So start pre-writing early. Letters of rec are another really big thing that a lot of students wait to get until like the application season is rolling, and then professors get bombarded with a million emails. I don't recommend that. One thing you can always do is once the class is done, ask for your letter of rec then, and then you can store it on a website like Interfolio. So it stays there until your application season opens. Or ask for the letter of rec during like off season, which I ended up doing. I asked for my letter of rec in like December or January, which is when application season isn't open yet. So professors were much more responsive and were a lot quicker at sending me the letter than, waiting until like June or July to ask for a letter.
Do you remember how many professors you had on your uh, potential list to ask, and how many actually agreed, and how many you ended up submitting through that funnel?
So I was pretty fortunate because I did ask on an off season. I think I sent emails to maybe like 4 professors or 5 professors, and 4 of them did get back to me, which was great. I ended up getting 2 science professors, both upper div, which I recommend. And then I ended up getting a letter of rec from an English professor. So I was pretty set on that. And then for extracurriculars, I asked like a former boss, a boss that's also an MD, a boss for another job that I had at UCLA, an extracurricular where I work with underserved community members, another extracurricular where I work in a health clinic. So I tried to get as many letters of rec as possible. Some schools only allow you to send 3, some allow you to send 5, some allow you to send up to 10. So it's better to just kind of have a good reservoir of letters of rec so that you can kind of pick and choose which ones you want to send to which school.
Yeah, I think it's very important. I just wrote a letter of rec actually for a volunteer from the Armenian Medical Society who, this kid, I mean, he showed up to every event. He had a really good attitude. He was smart. And, I was pretty impressed. So I asked him to actually do some side projects with me, not related to Armenian Medical Society. And, he, did them at 110% capacity. And I never told him I'd write a letter of rec. I never want to put pressure on anyone because, what if they want to only have academic letters of recommendation? And he asked me, and, I was very enthusiastic writing it, and, he'll be using it in his application. So, but I remember looking back when I asked for letters, it took them an average of about 4 weeks to
Mhm.
get it to me because, you know, it's one thing to ask, a professor to write a letter because they may be very busy and it's just on their to-do list. And, it does require, if they really like you, they don't want to write a generic letter, which actually means it's a lot of extra work for them,
Mhm.
and which is ideally what you don't want. And you did bring up a good point about your upper div versus lower div. You really, in my opinion, you should strive for upper div
Mhm.
letters because obviously the classes are smaller. So there's two advantages. Well, one's a double-edged sword. One is, you're going to have, 20, 30 person classes. It's your opportunity to get to know the professor and the TA. Second, if you really learn the material in your lower division classes and you really shine in that upper div, that is going to be the perfect confluence of you showing your talent, your commitment, not only as a student, but for the topic. Because,
Mhm.
if you've selected a major like I did, that's chemistry, it's not directly applicable to medicine. Most chemistry majors do not go on to a medical school. So if you're taking an upper div, say physical chemistry class, and you do very well, they're going to say, okay, this gentleman or madam wants to go on to medical school, but they still really, enjoy this material. So I'm actually going to take pride in writing this letter. Because it is not uncommon for professors to be annoyed at undergraduates who want to go to medical school or dental school because they tend to see them as not being very sincere in their
Mhm.
interest class or the topic. So always definitely keep that in mind. Okay, so it's very good. Now we talked about some of the mechanics. We talked about the MCAT, the prep, how you get your application together, and it is a daunting process, the letter. Okay, so you've submitted everything, and then you get that nice email or the letter in the mail where, now they want you to come in for an interview. What was that like, the interview process?
So obviously getting that email saying like we'd like to interview is very exciting. The way I went about it is I went onto Student Doctor Network, and on that website you can actually find interview questions that students posted from like previous year interviews that they had done at that particular school. So I would use that. I would copy paste the questions on like a Google Doc, and I would go question by question and just put bullet points as to what I want to discuss for each question and just practice talking it. I didn't type it out because I didn't want it to sound too mechanical or robotic. So I would just kind of this talk talk in a very more professional but casual way, but obviously not robotic. So have the question, bullet points as to what I want to address. And then online, there are a lot of, once again, great free resources on different websites with possible medical school questions you may be asked. So I also copy pasted those, went one by one, putting in bullets as to what I would discuss for each of those. And then for every school, I went in prepared with answering the possible question as why us? Why do you want to come to our school? And that's a question you should prepare for every single school. And even if they don't ask it, try to find the way to kind of put it in there. And the way I would prepare for that question is one, what do I like about or what stands out about the school's mission and program and how can I contribute? Two, talking about the school's location. Three, talking about very specific programs at the school. And four, I would always throw in why I would be a good fit. So try to use very specific details about the school combined with particular specifics of you to discuss why you'd be a good fit at that school. Because it shows that you've done research for the school and it shows that you're very interested in the school. And obviously, practice is very important. Some people may say, yeah, I'm really good with like my conversation skills. But, when you're sitting there and you're in a very different scenario with a complete stranger and your nerves are kind of building up, you may really not do as well as you expected because you didn't practice. So practice is always key.
Yeah. And I definitely recommend, I mean, it's easier said than done, but if you can get either a dentist, pharmacist, or physician to coach you at the interview, it is easier for people whose family members are physicians or
Mhm.
in the healthcare profession and have some academic bend. Then you're sort of in that general milieu of how these people think. But, if you're the first one in your family to,
Mhm.
go to college or enter medical school, and all you really know is your sort of undergraduate world, and you don't really know much about healthcare. What are the active topics in healthcare? Whether it's socialized medicine, some of the economic issues related to healthcare, um, you know, the growing, prevalence of capitated contracts or HMO systems. If you're not, you don't have to be fluent in these, but if you have no idea that there's even a conversation going on, well, you really sound like you're more of a PhD student than, someone going into healthcare. And, the actual day of, and, unfortunately, medical schools are slightly different from each other. If you go to Creighton, a Catholic school that's not coastal compared to UCSF, they're pretty different. It's a different attitude. There's, this different societal institutions that they are beholden to. So I think what you tell someone interviewing you at a, Catholic or, like Loma Linda, a Seventh-day Adventist school, is going to be pretty different than what you tell somebody at UCSF.
Hmm.
That's just the reality. These are things you're going to have to, um, do your research on and really think about how you're going to answer these questions because they are judgmental.
Hmm.
Absolutely. When I got in, it was about a 3-to-1 or 4-to-1 ratio between, the number of people they interviewed and, the number of spots available. It's far number for the number of applicants. It could be anywhere from 30-to-1, 50-to-1. So just because you get into that interview pool is by no means a shoe-in.
Yeah.
And you are splitting hairs at that point. So
Hmm.
yeah, unfortunately, I wish we had the time to talk more about interview prep, which
Hmm.
should not be taken lightly.
No.
But we're gonna have to save that for another Zoom session. So very good. So stepping back a little bit for your prep, there's a reason you got the interview. You kind of stood out from the others. You were also strengthening your MCAT. You obviously did well on your classes, you did well on your GPA, your MCAT, got your letters of rec, but you didn't tell them that, hey, I just volunteered at my university hospital for 5 hours and I really know why I'm going to medical school. Research has really become sort of a pillar. Did you do any bench research or did you do any clinical research? So tell me about some of that.
I did. So I did about 3 years of research at UCLA. It was an infectious diseases research lab. In the 3 years, some things kind of got a little cut up just because of COVID. So I wasn't able to go in as much as I would have liked. About a year and a half got cut off from that. But in the 3 years that I was there, I was able to take on an independent project by the end of my time there. And I was also able to do a poster presentation. I wasn't able to do any publications with that particular lab, but I did end up working with another physician, and ended up having a publication with him kind of on the side as a side project. And his was more of like a clinical case study that we were able to publish together. Research, just because things have become way more competitive, I think research is really like that cherry on the top. Having a publication is like brownie points on top of that. I do know some people, maybe like 6 years ago, that were able to get into medical school without research. But I feel like nowadays, if you want to get into a top research institute like Geffen or UCSF or the more competitive schools, you really need to have research. Showing that you know how to commit to a project long term and showing that you can produce something out of that research. Anybody can join a research lab and just clean the tables all day and not do anything with their time in the research lab. That doesn't show productivity. So when you're sitting in an interview and they ask you, well, tell me about your research, you need to be able to give them content. What did I do there? How did I spend my time? And what was the product of my time? So I think research is very important. It can be very difficult to get into a research lab at a lot of schools, especially UCLA. I sent out maybe 65 emails, only heard back from about 3 people that were willing to interview me. And from that 3, I picked one of them. And the way to go about that is just send lots of emails, have phone calls, just call the lab directly. You can show up directly to the PI's office if you're really committed to being in that lab and just introduce yourself and just show you're very committed to get into that lab. It's a lot harder to say no to somebody face to face than over an email. Another thing I would recommend is I think UCLA actually has like a research portal where some professors may go on and say that they're looking to fill somebody up in like a particular spot. If you have TAs that are in research labs, you can always talk to them, see if they're taking in any undergrads. Or you can talk to your upperclassmen and ask them if they're leaving their research lab anytime soon, if you can replace them. So there are a lot of ways to go about it. You just need to stay very committed and just don't let people not responding back to you kind of hold you back from just really trying.
Yeah. And, I think a lot of students do ask, why do I need to do research if I'm going on to, a career in healthcare? And, obviously it is sort of the backbone for a lot of the interventions, we have available that actually work. They are backed by research, but it doesn't necessarily mean your essay is going to be geared toward, you becoming a DDS PhD or MD PhD or a PharmD PhD or having a career in the lab. But what you want to be fluent in is, yes, I've worked in either a clinical research, a clinical research institution or a basic science lab. And for either one, you sort of know what it takes to put together, at the very least, an abstract. What's the methodology behind it? How do you even write the introductory paragraph? How did we do the statistical analysis? This was a see how hard it is to put these together. Failed experiments, outcomes don't work, the statistics are fuzzy, and then finding a poster session or a journal to submit to and see if it gets approved. At least going through all those emotions, it is going to develop a certain maturity. And whether or not you get it published or not, um, sure, it helps if it's published on the resume, but if you list these line items, it's if I was interviewing someone and they had one line item and it showed that they were published versus someone else who had 5 line items, none of them were published. And this person sits in front of me and they can tell me in exquisite detail what these 5 projects were like. That's going to carry a lot more weight than someone who had, one lucky half court shot.
Mhm.
So you want to learn, you want to build that muscle memory and sort of build those circuits in your brain, because that's just gonna, there's no way you're gonna fake that experience at the interview,
Mhm.
because it's gonna be real at that point. You've done 5 different research projects, you know how to do research at that point. So you're not faking it at that point. And these people have interviewed hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. They will weed out, the fakers, as I like to call them, within the first minute.
Yeah.
So your efforts will never be wasted. So very good. We are rounding the corner on the interview. So the last question I wanted to ask, for students who are preparing for the next application cycle, what do you think they should be wary of or cognizant of?
I mean, aside from everything that we've discussed already, there are some smaller things that you may not find out until you're actually in the application process. One of which is the importance of creating a good school list. You know, you it's one thing to apply left and right to any and every school, but one, it's expensive. Two, when secondaries come at you, you're going to be drowning. So you really want to create a school list that you are confident in, that these are schools you really want to go to, and you feel like you're going to have enough time to not only do the primary application, but all the secondary applications that are going to come after that. And so originally, I applied to 50 schools. I submitted my primary to 50 schools, but just because of some life occurrences, I wasn't able to submit all of my secondary applications. So I only submitted to 33 secondary. I only submitted my secondaries to 33 schools. And for the school list, one of the most important things that a lot of students overlook is in-state versus out-of-state acceptances. If you are applying to a school in California, a lot of the UCs have much higher in-state, which favors somebody from California. But if you're applying to a school, let's say in Nevada, where they favor more of their in-state students, where let's say they'll take in maybe 50 in-states versus 10 out-of-state, that puts you at a very big disadvantage if you're from California. So in-state versus out-of-state is something that's very important. You should favor a school that has a much higher out-of-state acceptance than an in-state acceptance when you're creating your school list. Another thing is some schools actually do have residency requirements, as in they only take students from certain regions or from certain states. For example, I think the University of Reno only favors students from certain states, or if you're from a state outside of those states, then you need to have some sort of a relative, or you need to have grown up in Nevada, or you need to have some sort of connection to Nevada to apply. A lot of people don't know that, and they'll just apply anyways, just because it's closer to California. Another thing is some schools have different sets of prerequisite courses that they require. Some schools require sociology, which is something that I didn't have. And I didn't know this until the school literally emailed me saying, hey, you're missing this prerequisite. So literally, I ended up enrolling in some online sociology course that day just to fulfill the course requirement. And thankfully, they accepted it. So in-state versus out-of-state, really just focusing your school list onto having safety schools, schools you fall into the range in, and maybe kind of schools that are a little bit out of your reach, but it doesn't hurt to try. Kind of breaking down your school list by that, paying attention to in-state versus out-of-state, making sure you fulfill the prerequisites, and making sure there are no weird residency requirements that you need to fulfill.
Okay. Very good. Well, we were able to get a lot across to our students, and this is the first in a series of videos we have planned. So we're going to be interviewing a lot of students on their journey to healthcare, and so we really appreciate your time, Sophia. We appreciate your wisdom, and we wish you the best of luck as you matriculate in about 2 weeks. So
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you again for this opportunity. I appreciate it.
thank you, and good luck, everyone.